This right here is an original iPhone, a pivotal device for Apple not just on the business side, but it also was a cultural icon that forever changed the way we interact with technology. However, a year or two before this very device was released, there was another quote-unquote iPhone that was even co-developed with Apple themselves that didn't quite hit the same way. And it just so happens that I have one right here for us to unbox. So let's jump right in. First, a little bit of history. In the early half of the 2000s, the iPod was taking the world by storm. People absolutely loved Apple's digital music player, not just because it was convenient, letting you carry thousands and thousands of songs in your pocket, but it also looked good, had an interface that was quite easy to use, and at this point in time, Apple reportedly sold over 22 million of them. It quickly became a household name, a cultural icon, and that's not even the whole story. A huge part of the iPod's success came thanks to the platform that it was tied to, iTunes. It was the hub to manage and sync content to the iPod itself, but most notably, it was also, for quite a long time, the largest music marketplace in the world. Through 2005, it amassed over 20 million active users, over 300 million music tracks sold, and combined with the iPod, this formative ecosystem for Apple was generating billions and billions of dollars in revenue. The rest, of course, is history. However, it can be easy to forget that up until the iPod, Apple was not doing so hot, and they were still trying to figure things out. And on the ground floor of this sort of renaissance era that the iPod kickstarted, let's just say that they made some interesting partnerships over those years. For one, Apple strategically signed with HP back in 2004 to make co-branded iPods that were both sold and serviced by Hewlett-Packard themselves. I'm gonna save the nitty-gritty on that for another video. Definitely subscribe if you want to explore that rabbit hole with me. But one of the interesting Apple collaborations that I remember seeing growing up as a budding tech enthusiast was this proto-iPhone that was co-developed with Motorola back in 2005 called the ROKR E1. And 20 years later, I finally have one here in the studio, complete in box, to actually check out. Now, going off the original listing from eBay, this example of the Moto ROKR E1 should come with all of the original packaging and accessories in tow. And judging by the appearance of this box, I can believe it, it is really clean. Speaking of the appearance of the box, this one is really orange, and that's because the carrier that was selling it, Singular, dictated the look. In fact, here in the US, they were the exclusive carrier for the Moto ROKR E1, and if that sounds familiar, that's because the iPhone also followed the same trajectory. Ooh, oh, that is clean. It even has film around the screen. Other accessories, we have a tri-pole headphone extender, the back battery door. It's going to be useful for us later, for sure. The battery, which looks like it's still factory sealed. And over here, we have the original headphones for the Moto ROKR E1, which, as you can see, let me get it closer to my top-down camera here, they look a bit crusty. Under this top layer, we get more things. Look at this. Okay. We get, of course, a CD for iTunes, because the big draw for the Moto ROKR E1 is the fact that it was one of the few third-party devices that could actually sync via iTunes, which was a hot feature at the time. We also have a whole lot of paperwork here, which looks minty fresh. Holy crap. Oh man. If you want to sign for the times, these were some of the earliest Bluetooth accessories you can buy. And I remember I actually had this particular headset to use with my PlayStation 3 so that I can communicate with people on Resistance Fall of Man. This is a full quick start guide for how to use the Moto ROKR. We also have this one, which tells you how to install iTunes and sync music on to the device itself. We're gonna have to tap into this guy a little later, and hopefully the Moto ROKR E1 can sync to, if not my newer MacBook here, perhaps one of the older ones that we have in the office running an older version of macOS. Stay tuned to see how well that works. We also have our charger here, which was obviously before the time of universal spec like micro USB or USB-C. But I do like that the actual wall wart part of this was actually relatively slim. And last, but certainly not least, we have a USB cable to sync the Moto ROKR E1 to our computer with a whatever the hell pin connector that is. Man, times have changed. Just be thankful that we have standards like USB-C now to make everything universal and way slimmer and easier to use. But yeah, let me get this Moto ROKR all charged up. We'll see if it works and how easy it will be to actually sync music onto this in 2025.
It was at this moment Ken realized he f***ed up.
Okay, status update. In probably what is par for the course for trying to fire up a 20-year-old feature phone, we are running into a few problems. For one, the included battery is completely shot. Not only will it not hold a charge, but I think it's turning into one of them spicy pillows. Thankfully, our Moto ROKR E1 does at least power on when it's plugged into the wall, but that's where I found problem number 2. As a cell phone that was carrier locked back in 2005, this device straight up won't let me do anything without a SIM card. Now, not to think this was going to work, but I did find a random T-Mobile SIM card in an old Sidekick we had laying around in the studio. But naturally, that didn't work because, again, from our unboxing, this phone is actually locked to singular AT&T. Though, in doing this, I did make a little bit of progress because now the phone is asking me for some kind of unlock PIN code, which I also don't have. So then the next step was to try unlocking the Moto ROKR E1 through AT&T themselves. Now, long since the release of the Moto ROKR E1 here in the US, AT&T, as a result of US regulation, have created a pathway to unlock devices labeled for their network. This is most certainly handy for customers that decide to leave the carrier after fully paying off their device and might want to take it to use on other networks, or are like me and have a locked device but are not an AT&T customer. There is most certainly fine print attached to this process depending on what device you are actually trying to unlock, but for the Moto ROKR E1, we are well within the criteria for this to work. Except it didn't. Our device kinda sorta shows up on the website, but it did not give me any code or guidance here. I think this phone is genuinely too old for them to even care for it. So, in a last-ditch effort to rectify this situation, once again, I turned to eBay. This time to purchase an old singular AT&T SIM card, with the hope here being that even if the SIM card won't be lit up with cellular service, that it might be enough to at least get past this annoying unlock screen to actually properly try out this 20-year-old phone. Which now brings us to now. I have my Moto ROKR E1 with a singular SIM card installed. Also, while I was on eBay, I found myself a replacement battery that is not inflated. Granted, this isn't a new battery. In fact, it is older than the previous one. But according to the listing, it should hold a charge, which is definitely an upgrade from before. So let's see if this phone will actually fire up for real for real. Holding down the power button. There we go. Hello, Moto. Now, as far as the interface goes, it is quite reminiscent of other Motorola products of this era. In fact, if you've ever used the original Moto Razr, which was at the time the most popular phone in the world, the looks, features, functionality were basically the same. But mainly, what I want to try out with our Moto ROKR E1 is that iTunes functionality. And the first question I have is, can I actually sync this guy with a modern day MacBook? At first, that might seem like a sort of unreasonable question since, again, this is a 20-year-old feature phone. But what some people might not know is that legacy iPods, such as this first generation Nano, still have support with newer versions of macOS. This one specifically is plugged in via 30-pin to USB-A via a USB-C hub. And look at that, it is showing up in Finder, no problem. So surely with our Moto ROKR E1 having official iTunes support back in the day, this must work. So let's plug this in on the bottom. It's pretty satisfying. Gonna disconnect our iPod here, plug in our Moto ROKR E1, like so. It recognizes it's plugged into some kind of computer. Is Finder gonna see it? I'll take that as a no. Okay, well, in all fairness to the Moto ROKR E1, it's not like this was an official iPod to begin with, but still, you know, worth a shot. Next up, what I have here is a unibody 2009 MacBook, which is running Snow Leopard. Now, I should preface that I haven't done a full amount of research to see how long the support for the Moto ROKR E1 was with iTunes, but I would like to think Snow Leopard is old enough to support it, maybe? Plug this bad boy in. Oh, look at that. I know I just said this device isn't officially an iPod, but that do not connect screen is iPod as f. Oh, it showed up in our Finder. Hell yeah. And you can even see we have an iTunes folder right on the device itself. Let's open up iTunes here, and we're still not getting the ROKR E1 on our side panel. Or maybe this version of iTunes isn't as old as I think it is. Yep, copyright 2012. All right, I found an old Apple community post here from 2010 stating that the Moto ROKR E1 started having problems with iTunes at around version 9.2, with 9.1 and older seemingly working fine. So I guess I'm hunting for a version of iTunes 9 now. Wait, y'all, I am so freaking dumb. I just realized something. The box actually came with a freaking iTunes CD. Boom, here we go. Wait, it's not going in. Scratch that, maybe the disk drive is broken. I guess I'm back to downloading now. All right, things are a little jank right now because browsing the web on a 2009 MacBook running a way out of date version of macOS is very difficult. But as you can see here, I have found a link to iTunes 9.0.1. Fingers crossed that this actually works and is not a virus, but yeah, our phone sees it right off the bat. Let's open up iTunes. Oh, do not connect. Our drive did show up here, but iTunes at some point, maybe do something. Please? Please? All right, maybe we've hit some kind of other critical failure here with our system. Remember, if you're having a bad day, at least you're not getting this error. This project is going to get done one way or another. I'm gonna restart this whole dang computer at this point. Man, it even seems like iTunes 8 might not be working with this phone, which is weird because everything that I'm seeing online suggests that this version should work totally fine. And I power cycled this phone, and even just for good measure to make sure it's not an iTunes thing, I plugged in this iPod into my 2009 MacBook, and this version of iTunes definitely sees it. So I don't exactly know what exactly is going on with our Moto ROKR E1. It's just not doing the handshake with iTunes to let us sync music onto it. Let's try iTunes 7. If it works with this version of macOS, which I'm not sure if it will, what else am I gonna do? All right, y'all, I've gone way older with iTunes 6. Let's plug in the ROKR E1. Hopefully, iTunes will do its thing. Hello? Why? It'll be really f***ed up if the answer to all of this is not using the CD for Mac, but actually using a Windows version of iTunes with like Windows XP or Windows Vista or something like that. All right, guys, I am almost at the end of my rope here. So I tried syncing this Moto ROKR E1 to my M4 MacBook Pro, which I already kind of expected to not work since that machine is really new. So then I was like, okay, maybe a 2009 MacBook running something like Snow Leopard, a really old version of macOS, could probably work, but that didn't either. Which brings me to my next best option we have here in the office, a custom PC running Windows Vista of all things, but most importantly, it has a disk drive right here, which will be important to install our included copy of iTunes that came in the box with our Moto ROKR E1. Now, this computer seems remotely familiar to you. That's because you probably saw it on Austin's channel a couple of months ago. And I do believe, at least from what I saw in that video, this thing should power on. So let's do it. Oh gosh. Oh! Yes! Yes, 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 yes. Oh, we got it. We got it. Oh, it's finally connected. It's interesting because I've actually reset this phone like 5 times just trying to get it to work with everything. But this is the first time I'm plugging it into a Windows PC after a reset. And I guess that did the trick. I won't question it. All that's left for it now is we have to get music onto our Windows machine so that we can actually transfer it onto the Moto ROKR itself. And then we can actually get some listening impressions on our 20-year-old first iPhone. And so here we are with the Moto ROKR E1. I managed to get a couple of songs loaded on here. Now, an interesting limitation with this device and iTunes is that even though it has 512 megabytes of storage included, there's actually a software cap that limits you to syncing only 100 songs, regardless of how much storage you have on this device's user upgradable memory card. This was likely due to Apple not wanting the E1 to properly compete with its very own iPod, so that sucked. To access our pseudo iPod player, you can see it in the main menu or by clicking on this music icon. You can browse by playlists, artists, albums, songs, or you can just shuffle from your library altogether. And since I just loaded one EP on here, I'm just gonna play that real quick. The built-in speaker in here actually has a decent amount of thump to it. There is a 3.5mm headphone jack you could plug in. What? That's not a normal headphone jack, are you Hello, Ken from the future here. So turns out I'm a little bit of a dummy. And that's because I totally forgot that in the box, we actually had this headphone adapter all along, which will of course allow us to use whatever we want to listen with as long as it has a 3.5mm jack. However, to really get that full experience Motorola intended, let's take a listen at what those stock headphones are like. Oh man, these are so crusty. There's so much debris in here. All right, I guess I'm gonna wipe these down and try to make them clean enough to put in my ears. Hopefully I don't end up with some dusty ear holes after this. Look at how gross that is. You know what? For late 2000s earbuds, these don't sound half bad. But yeah, looking at our now playing screen, it does look pretty reminiscent of the iPod, even down to our progress bar here on the bottom. Press down on the joystick once and you get your full album artwork in color of whatever you're playing. Hit it again, and you can actually skip through the song to any place you want. All very similar to that of an iPod. Yeah, man, I mean, all of this is really cool, but it does come with a fair amount of drawbacks. Also, apart from the complications I was experiencing trying to sync music onto this device, just the sheer fact that this phone did not have the standard connectivity of the iPod meant that it doesn't give it access to a lot of really key accessories like speakers, chargers, etc. that made the iPod honestly a really good experience back in the day. All this to say, I do think the Moto ROKR E1 was destined to fail from the get-go, but that doesn't make it any less interesting of a device to look at, certainly 20 years later. And it must have not been a total failure because Motorola would go on to make a few more of these, albeit without that iTunes support. It was probably for the better anyway. But yeah, let me know what you think of the original iPhone in the comments below. And otherwise, thanks for watching this video on Denki channel.